Many of the rash and ill-advised measures pushed in the past 2 years are suddenly coming under greater scrutiny, as are many in the government who used a virus as cover to act with impunity and passing laws that limited people's freedoms regardless of their rights. That's what happened to the California counties of Ventura and Los Angeles in a decision handed down by a three-judge panel of the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which called their decision to forcibly close gun stores using the excuse of COVID, saying it was illegal and a violation of constitutional Second Amendment rights. From March 20th to May 7th, 2020, a total of 48 days, Ventura and Los Angeles counties mandated the closure of gun shops, ammunition shops, and firing ranges, while not only big box stores were allowed to remain open, but even things like bicycle shops were as well. This is a victory that helps push back the tide on both anti-gun and COVID authoritarianism. Joining me now to discuss is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, Dr. John Lott. Thanks for being here tonight, John.
Great to talk to you again.
Great. So earlier this week, Biden held his second ever presser since taking office. And before it, you had actually written an article at Town Hall suggesting some questions that reporters, if they actually want to do their jobs, should ask Biden to push back on some of his gun rhetoric in the wake of last weekend's terror hostage situation at a Texas synagogue. So long and short of it, did any of your questions get asked or answered?
No, didn't bring any of them up. I thought since he kind of gave that impromptu kind of question and answer session on Sunday for a couple minutes, I thought that would tee up some questions, but no. I mean, it was his normal rhetoric. He was blaming the increase in gun sales for the increase in violent crime over the last couple of years, even though I think most people would understand that the gun sales went up because the crime went up rather than the reverse. And that there were lots of reasons, from inmates being released from jails and prisons to police budgets being cut to prosecutors not doing their job to bail reform and on. We could go and talk about it. But I think the most damaging piece of evidence against his claim is simply that we have data for 2020 now. And while violent crime increased, both aggravated assaults and murders went up, what you find is, in fact, gun crime fell. Gun crime fell by about 27% between 2019 and 2020. So it's kind of hard to go and blame guns for the increase in violent crime when the number of crimes with guns actually fell dramatically while overall violent crime went up. I mean, I think one thing that most people don't realize is that about 92% of violent crime in most years has absolutely nothing to do with guns.
That is very interesting. I was actually shocked when I was reading your article on this. That was a figure I hadn't heard previously. And, another big key ticket item, talking point Democrats have had this week, especially Biden, when it comes to the Texas synagogue hostage situation, is they say background checks. So that's what we really need. If we had the background checks, really ramp those up, that could have perhaps stopped that. Why do you think that perhaps misses the mark?
I mean, background checks on the private transfers of guns has been the go-to regulation that, Obama brought up and Biden brings up after every mass public shooting that occurs. There's only one problem. I kind of wish the media would ask him, like he on Sunday when he was bringing that up as his top reform that he wanted to have, would it have stopped this attack? Would it have stopped any mass public shooting this century? There's not one mass public shooting this century where 4 more people have been killed, where even if that law had been in effect and been perfectly enforced, it would have made a difference in terms of it. And just, I want to do something, but, I want to do something that actually matters. I mean, they talk about wanting to do something, but look, this attack, and I'm not saying that the killer knew it in this case, but this attack took place in a place where guns weren't allowed. Places of worship in Texas are allowed to go and have people carry permanent concealed handguns. And I know a lot of Jewish synagogues in the state do allow that. But the rabbi who ran this particular synagogue was very liberal and very anti-gun, and he had apparently ordered his congregation not to bring guns. And in fact, there were posts by at least a couple former people who had been part of that synagogue who had left in part because they weren't allowed to go and protect themselves or others.
That is a shame. And now also looking at, some of your other writings this week, switching gears a little bit, I saw you were writing the Washington Times about some of Biden's other comments, especially this past week when Democrats failed to ram through changes to the filibuster to push through their changes to voting in this nation. What are some of the main takeaways that you would like for viewers to have?
Right. Well, I mean, people know Biden was accusing Republicans of being like Bull Connor or Jefferson Davis or George Wallace, calling them anti-democratic and totalitarian because they wanted to have things like voter ID type rules in a state. The thing is, if Biden and Democrats, Pelosi also got into that, using that type of rhetoric, and others have too, if they really believe that things like voter IDs are anti-democratic and totalitarian, then they must believe all the countries, all 47 countries in Europe are anti-democratic and totalitarian. So countries like France and Sweden, which require that all of them require that you have to have a government-issued photo ID in order to be able to go and vote. And beyond that, so like in Georgia, where he was at and giving his big speech, the one things that have gotten the Democrats most upset about the Georgia new law is that if you have an absentee ballot, you're required to put down, let's say, the last four digits of your Social Security number. Well, all Americans have a Social Security number. Many non-Americans have a Social Security number. And, somehow that's anti-democratic. Well, 75% of European countries completely ban absentee ballots. And another 20% will not send it to you in the mail. You have to go in person and show your government-issued photo ID in order to go and pick it up. So 95% of European countries have restrictions that, nobody in the United States is even remotely even talking about. And so if having to put down the last four digits of your Social Security number on a ballot that they mail to you is somehow totalitarian or anti-democratic, then then all the European countries are way beyond the pale in terms of being surely totalitarian countries, and it's just not them. Canada would be anti-democratic and totalitarian because they require a government-issued ID to vote. Mexico is anti-democratic and totalitarian. So we're kind of like the lone non-totalitarian country, but even then they would argue parts of our country are. And of course, the most flabbergasting thing in his press conference this week was to say that he wasn't going to consider the elections legitimate if they didn't pass their two bills that aren't getting passed. So I'm still waiting for the media to kind of go after him on those statements, but maybe we have to wait a while.
What a world that we live in that America is out liberaling Europe, and especially the Scandinavian and Nordic nations. I mean, what a world. Dr. John Lott, always a pleasure having you on. Thanks for joining us tonight.